I smoothed my silk dress as I surveyed the dining room one last time. Everything was perfect for our annual family dinner. The crystal gleamed, the silver shone, and the catering from Le Bernardin would arrive any minute. After 20 years of marriage to James, I knew how to host these gatherings flawlessly. "The table looks beautiful, Mrs. Harrison," our housekeeper Martha whispered, adjusting a flower arrangement. She'd been with us for 15 years and knew something was wrong. I'd been too precise today, too focused on every detail. "Thank you, Martha. Has James called to confirm he's on his way?" "No, ma'am. But Miss Taylor, his secretary, did call to say they're leaving the office shortly." "Of course she did." Victoria Taylor, James's new executive assistant, had been calling our house more than he had lately. At 32, she was everything I'd been when I first met James at law school. Brilliant, ambitious, and utterly determined. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire, my best friend and our family's financial advisor. "Everything's ready. Are you sure about tonight?" "It has to be tonight," I typed back. "The papers are filed tomorrow morning." I'd spent 6 months preparing for this evening, ever since I first noticed the changes in James. The late nights at the office, the new cologne, the sudden interest in looking younger. I might have been just another corporate wife to him now, but I hadn't forgotten my own legal training. The doorbell chimed, my brother Michael arriving first, right on time as always. As the head of forensic accounting at Goldman Sachs, he'd been instrumental in what was about to unfold. "You look terrifying," he said, hugging me. That serene smile always meant trouble in law school. "Everything's set?" He nodded. "The SEC. Filing is ready. Claire has all the documentation. The moment you give the signal, it all goes public." The door chimed again. This time it was James's parents, Robert and Eleanor. They'd always treated me like a daughter, which made tonight even harder. "Elizabeth, darling." Eleanor air-kissed my cheeks. "Where's James? Usually he's home early for family dinner." "Still, at the office," I replied smoothly. "With his secretary." Robert's slight frown told me he'd heard the edge in my voice. As a retired judge, he didn't miss much. More family arrived, James's sister Catherine and her husband, my parents, various cousins. Finally, I heard James's key in the lock. Victoria's laugh floated in before I saw them. "Sorry we're late," James called out. "Had to finish the Anderson merger documents." He entered the dining room with Victoria close behind, her hand resting casually on his arm. She'd worn a dress that cost more than most junior associates' monthly salary, paid for by the corporate card James had given her, according to the records Claire had uncovered. "Everyone's here. Perfect." Victoria's voice carried that practiced excitement I recognized from my own younger days. "James and I have an announcement to make." I caught Michael's eye across the room. He gave me the slightest nod. Everything was in place. "Would anyone like champagne first?" I offered, my voice steady. I had Martha chill the crystal. "Actually," James stepped forward, taking Victoria's hand, "maybe we should make our announcement first." I watched my husband of 20 years beam at his secretary, saw the diamond ring catching the light as she held up her hand. Everything I'd suspected, everything I'd prepared for, crystallized in that moment. "Victoria and I are engaged," James announced to the stunned room. I know this may come as a shock, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Elizabeth and I have grown apart, and you've fallen in love with your secretary. I finished for him. How unexpected indeed. Though perhaps we should discuss some business matters before the congratulations begin. James's smile faltered slightly. He knew that tone. I'd used it in court often enough before giving up my career to support his. "Business can wait," he said firmly. "This is a family dinner." "Oh, but this is family business," I replied, picking up my phone. "Claire, you can proceed with the filing now." The room had gone completely silent. Even Victoria's perfect smile had slipped a fraction. What filing? James demanded. Elizabeth, what are you doing? Actually, I smiled, lifting my wine glass. I think that's my line. What are you doing, James? Announcing your engagement before our divorce? Before telling your family you've been sleeping with your secretary? Or perhaps, before checking who actually owns your firm? James's face went through a series of expressions I hadn't seen since our days in court together. Confusion, dismissal, and finally, the first flicker of fear. What are you talking about? He demanded, dropping Victoria's hand. I built Harrison and Reed from nothing. I own controlling interest. You did, I agreed pleasantly, nodding to Michael. Until about 6 months ago. Would you like to explain the particulars, brother dear? Or should I? Michael pulled out his tablet, every inch the precise forensic accountant. It's quite fascinating, actually. While you were busy with the Anderson merger and other distractions, you missed some interesting market movements. Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. James, what's he talking about? Nothing, James snapped. This is some kind of bluff. Elizabeth's just upset about us. About you announcing your engagement to your secretary at our family dinner. I interrupted. Actually, I'm rather grateful for your timing. It makes the SEC filing so much more poetic. Our guests sat frozen, watching the drama unfold like a particularly engaging tennis match. James's father, Robert, the retired judge, was leaning forward with keen interest. Perhaps, I continued, we should review the past 6 months. After I noticed certain irregularities in your behavior, I did some investigating. Imagine my surprise when I discovered you'd been selling off company shares to fund a rather expensive lifestyle. James's face paled. He'd always underestimated my financial acumen, forgetting I'd graduated top of our class in corporate law. Those were legitimate transactions, he protested. Perfectly legal. The sales were legal, Michael agreed, though the SEC might question the timing, given the insider information you were acting on. But the interesting part was who was buying. I pulled up my own phone, displaying the trading records Claire had meticulously compiled. A series of shell companies, each purchasing just enough shares to avoid triggering reporting requirements. Do you recognize the names, James? You should. You taught me how to set up offshore accounts during the Peterson case. Victoria was slowly backing away from James, her engagement ring catching the light. You said the company was secure, she whispered. You promised. Oh, it's very secure, I assured her. Just not in the way you thought. While you two were planning your future, I was purchasing controlling interests through those shell companies. As of this morning, I own 53% of Harrison and Reed. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. James's sister Catherine actually applauded briefly before her husband shushed her. That's impossible, James sputtered. The board would never... The board doesn't know yet, I cut in smoothly. That's what Claire's filing right now. The disclosure of new ownership, along with some rather interesting documentation about certain financial irregularities we discovered. Michael stepped forward, still scrolling through his tablet. Like the private jet trips to the Cayman Islands charged to client accounts, or the mysterious consulting fees paid to a company registered in Victoria's name. James lunged for his phone, but I was already shaking my head. Your access to the company's servers was revoked 10 minutes ago. Standard procedure when there's suspicion of financial misconduct. You can't do this, he growled. I built that firm. I made it what it is. And now I own it, I finished. Consider it my anniversary gift to you both. Though, Victoria, dear, you might want to have that ring appraised. The corporate account he used to buy it is being frozen. Martha appeared silently at my elbow with a fresh bottle of Cristal. I smiled at our stunned guests. Now, shall we have that champagne? I believe we're celebrating new beginnings. The look on James's face as his world crumbled was worth every minute of the 6 months I'd spent planning this moment. He'd taught me everything he knew about corporate takeovers, never imagining I'd use those lessons against him. The board meets tomorrow morning, I informed him. 8 a.m. sharp. Do try to be on time. It would be awkward for the majority shareholder to have to fire you for tardiness. Victoria's high heels clicked rapidly across the marble floor as she fled the room. Smart girl. She'd already realized which way the wind was blowing. Elizabeth, James's father Robert spoke up, legal interest overcoming family shock. I assume you have documentation of everything? Of course, I smiled. I learned from the best, after all. James always said the key to a successful takeover was impeccable paperwork. The room had divided into clear camps, my family looking proud, James's looking shell-shocked, and James himself looking like he'd been hit by a truck. 20 years, he finally managed. 20 years of marriage, and this is how you end it? And this is how you end— No, James, I corrected him gently. You ended our marriage the moment you decided to announce your engagement to your secretary at our family dinner. I'm just ensuring I get a fair settlement, namely, everything. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison and Reed's offices exactly 30 minutes before the emergency board meeting. The security guards, already notified of the ownership change, nodded respectfully as I crossed the lobby. Mrs. Harrison, Claire met me at the elevator, tablet in hand. The SEC filing went through at midnight. Every major financial news outlet has picked up the story. I scanned the headlines on her screen. Corporate wife takes control in surprise takeover. Harrison and Reed ownership shakeup amid scandal. Wall Street's most dramatic revenge play. Any word from James? I asked, stepping into what had been his private elevator. He tried to access the company servers all night. His passwords have been revoked, his email archived, and his access cards deactivated. Standard protocol for executives under investigation. The top floor was chaos. Board members huddled in groups, whispering urgently. Victoria's desk was conspicuously empty, a half-full coffee cup the only sign she'd been there at all. Elizabeth! James stormed out of his office, my office now. This is insane. You can't just walk in here and— Actually, I can, and I have. I handed my coat to his stunned assistant. Martha, would you mind hanging this in my office? And please have facilities remove Mr. Harrison's personal items. Standard boxes will do. The boardroom fell silent as I entered, James trailing behind me like an angry shadow. 12 pairs of eyes watched us take our seats, me at the head of the table, him grudgingly to the side. Good morning? I began pleasantly. I realize this is unusual, but given the circumstances, I felt an emergency meeting was warranted. This is ridiculous, James interrupted. She's trying to— Mr. Harrison, I cut in smoothly. As you are currently under investigation for financial misconduct, you may wish to exercise your right to remain silent, particularly since the SEC investigators are joining us shortly. That shut him up. The board members shifted uncomfortably, several loosening their ties. Now then, I continued, let's review the situation. As of midnight, I am majority shareholder of Harrison and Reed. My first act will be a complete audit of all accounts, focusing particularly on certain irregular transactions that have recently come to light. Claire distributed folders containing the evidence we'd gathered. The room filled with the sound of shuffling papers and sharp intakes of breath. These consulting fees, one director spoke, up? They're all paid to the same offshore company? Indeed, I smiled. Registered to Victoria Taylor, though the beneficial ownership documents list James as controlling partner. Rather messy paperwork for our compliance department. James's face had gone from red to white. He'd taught me about offshore accounts during a particularly complex case years ago, never imagining I'd use that knowledge to trace his own financial misconduct. The board cannot allow this. He tried again. The clients— are already being notified, I interrupted. Most seem quite relieved to learn their billing irregularities will be investigated. The Anderson family was particularly interested in why their merger costs included charges for private jet trips to the Cayman Islands. The SEC investigators chose that moment to enter, led by an old law school classmate who'd chosen government service over corporate law. Perfect timing, I nodded to them. We were just discussing the offshore accounts. I believe you'll find the documentation quite thorough. James slumped in his chair, finally realizing the completeness of his defeat. He'd spent years building his power through a network of secrets and financial schemes. I'd spent 6 months methodically uncovering every one of them. This is still my firm. He made one last attempt. My name is on the door. Actually, I corrected him, it's your father's name. And he's already signed the paperwork approving my takeover. Didn't you, Robert? James's head snapped around to stare at his father, who sat calmly in the corner. The evidence was quite convincing, the retired judge said quietly. You taught her well, son. Perhaps too well. The next hour was a blur of legal documents, formal notifications, and increasingly desperate attempts by James to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. You'll destroy everything I built, he accused as the meeting concluded. No, James, I replied, gathering my papers. I'm going to build something better, without the secrets, without the schemes, without the lies. You taught me how to take control. Now I'm going to teach everyone how to use it properly, The first month of my leadership brought changes that shook Harrison and Reed to its foundations. Every system James had built, every hidden arrangement, every secret deal, I exposed and reformed them all. The audit team found another set of hidden accounts, Claire reported during our morning meeting. 3 more shell companies, all linked to transactions with the Miller Group. I reviewed the documents carefully. James had been systematic in his deceptions, using methods he'd once proudly taught me during our early years together. Send everything to the SEC, I decided. And schedule a meeting with the Miller Group. It's time they knew who they were really dealing with. My phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. James says you're destroying his legacy. He wants to negotiate. His legacy of hidden accounts and fraudulent billing? I typed back. That destruction is quite intentional. The office had transformed in just a few weeks. Gone were the nervous glances and whispered conversations that had characterized James's leadership. In their place was a new atmosphere of openness and accountability. The junior associates have a proposal, Claire mentioned, handing me another folder. They want to establish an ethics committee to review all new client engagements. I smiled, remembering how James had mocked such ideas as naive and impractical. He'd believed power came from controlling information. I was proving it came from sharing it. Mrs. Harrison, my assistant interrupted. Mr. Miller is here for your meeting. Thomas Miller entered my office warily. He'd been one of James's closest allies in the old system of mutual favors and hidden arrangements. I assume you've reviewed the audit findings, I began, watching his face carefully. Elizabeth, he tried his old patronizing tone. These arrangements are complex. James understood he was breaking the law, I interrupted. The question is whether you understood it too. I laid out his options clearly. Either cooperate with our new transparency initiatives or face the consequences of his past collusion with James's schemes. You're changing everything, he accused. The whole system. Yes, I agreed. That's exactly what I'm doing. The old system of secrets and favors is over. Welcome to the age of accountability. Later, reviewing the day's progress with Claire, we watched another of James's carefully constructed networks crumble. Miller Group has agreed to full disclosure, she reported. 3 more clients have followed suit. They're all scrambling to avoid being caught on the wrong side of the change. My phone lit up with another message from James. You've turned everyone against me. No, I replied. I've shown them a better way to operate. You taught me how to take control. I'm teaching them how to use it responsibly. The afternoon brought news that our stock had risen 15% since my takeover. The market, it seemed, valued transparency over hidden schemes. You know what James never understood? I asked Claire as we ended the day. Real power doesn't come from what you can hide. It comes from what you can reveal. Looking out over the city skyline from my office, truly my office now, I thought about how James had spent years teaching me his methods. Every secret account, every hidden deal, every careful manipulation. Your husband left quite a mess, our head of compliance observed, delivering the latest audit findings. No, I corrected him. He left me quite an opportunity. Sometimes the best way to build something new is to expose everything wrong with the old. Victoria's desk had been cleared out, her perfect corporate facade crumbling along with James's empire. She'd tried to maintain her position, claiming ignorance of the schemes, but the evidence had been too clear. You've changed more than the company, Claire noted as we reviewed the transformation. You've changed how business itself works here. Because James taught me everything except the most important lesson, I replied. That real success doesn't require secrets. It demands integrity. The sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows. Through the office, James had once ruled through fear and hidden power. Now it was a place of open doors and clear records, where success came from merit rather than manipulation. Ready for tomorrow? Claire asked, gathering her things. I smiled, thinking of all the changes still to come. Ready to keep building something better. 6 weeks into my leadership of Harrison and Reed, the first coordinated resistance emerged. James's old network hadn't gone quietly into the night. They'd been planning a counterattack. 3 major clients are threatening to leave, Claire reported, spreading documents across my desk. All connected to the Petersons, James's oldest allies. I studied the threat letters carefully. The language was pure James, veiled references to traditional business methods and established relationships that were really just code for the old corrupt system. They think they can pressure us back into the shadows, I noted, highlighting key phrases. Look at these demands. Private billing arrangements, unofficial meetings, everything James used to hide his schemes. My phone buzzed with a message from James. You can't fight the whole system, Elizabeth. Some clients require discretion. You mean they require corruption? I typed back. Watch me change their minds. I called an emergency meeting with our executive team. The conference room filled quickly, some faces nervous, others determined. They'd all seen how completely I dismantled James's power structure. The Petersons and their allies think they can force us back to the old ways, I began. They've forgotten who taught me about corporate warfare. Claire distributed our response strategy, not just defending our new transparency, but using it as a weapon against the old guard's pressure. Release everything, I ordered. Every hidden deal, every secret arrangement, every questionable transaction from the past decade. Let them see what sunshine does to shadows. They'll retaliate, our head of operations warned. The Petersons have connections throughout the industry. Good, I smiled, remembering how James had taught me about leverage. Let them show everyone exactly who they are and how they operate. By afternoon, the first wave of disclosures hit the financial press. Headlines screamed about decades of questionable dealings between James's network and major corporations. The CC is very interested in these patterns, Claire reported, showing me real-time market reactions, especially the cross-company connections. My phone lit up with increasingly desperate messages from James's allies. They hadn't expected this level of counterattack. You're destroying decades of business relationships, James texted. Everything I built. You built a house of cards, I replied. I'm building something that doesn't need to hide. The Peterson Group's stock was falling as investors reacted to the exposures. They'd forgotten the first rule of modern business. Markets value transparency over tradition. 2 more clients trying to withdraw their threats, Claire announced. They don't want their own dealings exposed. I called a press conference to drive the point home. Standing at the podium, I thought about how James had always avoided public scrutiny. Harrison and Reed is entering a new era, I declared to the assembled media. One where success comes from integrity, not secrecy. Our critics claim some clients require discretion. We believe all clients deserve transparency. The market responded immediately. Our stock rose as investors recognized the value of clean business practices. The Petersons are backing down, Claire reported by evening. Their board called an emergency meeting after their stock dropped 20%. Looking out at the city lights, I remembered how James had taught me about power through control and fear. I was teaching everyone about power through openness and trust. You know what they never understood? I asked Claire as we reviewed the day's victories. Real strength doesn't come from what you can hide. It comes from having nothing to hide, Victoria called later, her perfect composure cracking. James says you're dismantling everything, that you've turned his own tactics against him. No, I corrected her. I've shown everyone a better way. The old system isn't being dismantled, it's being exposed. The resistance was crumbling faster than anyone expected. Each disclosure, each revelation, each demonstration of clean business success drove another nail into the coffin of James's corrupt network. Ready for tomorrow? Claire asked as we ended the day. Ready to keep showing them what real power looks like? I replied, thinking of all the lessons James had taught me about corporate warfare. He never imagined I'd use them to defeat not just him, but his entire way of doing business. Sometimes the best way to fight darkness isn't through more shadows, it's through bringing everything into the light. 2 months into my transformation of Harrison and Reed, an unexpected opportunity arose. Other firms, inspired by our success, wanted to join the transparency revolution. Morrison & Stanley is requesting a meeting, Claire announced, bringing in their proposal. Their board has voted to adopt our ethical framework. I remembered Morrison & Stanley well. They'd been one of James's biggest competitors, often on the receiving end of his hidden dealings and market manipulations. Sarah Morrison is waiting in the conference room, Claire continued. She says, it's about more than just one firm. Sarah Morrison cut an impressive figure, every inch the successful CEO. But today, she looked both determined and slightly uncertain. You've done something remarkable, she began. Not just cleaned up one company, but shown a new way forward for all of us. My phone buzzed with a predictable message from James. Now you're colluding with my enemies? Have you forgotten everything I taught you about competition? No, I typed back. I've just learned what you never understood about cooperation. The meeting with Sarah went far beyond a simple partnership discussion. She wanted to create an alliance of firms committed to transparent operations. The old networks, the hidden deals, the mutual backscratching, she explained. It's not just wrong. It's becoming impossible to maintain. You've shown us all a better way. I studied her carefully. This isn't just about ethics, is it? She smiled grimly. It's about survival. The market has changed. Investors demand transparency. Clients expect integrity. You didn't just beat James's system, you made it obsolete. Claire brought in the latest market analysis. Firms operating under old-style secrecy were consistently underperforming those embracing transparency. It's not just Morrison & Stanley, she reported. 3 other major firms want to join the alliance. They've all seen our results. I called an emergency board meeting to discuss the opportunity. The conference room filled with faces that had once feared James's power, now eager to extend our influence. This goes beyond competition, I explained. We're not just changing one company, we're transforming an entire industry. The vote was unanimous. Harrison and Reed would lead an alliance of firms committed to transparent operations and ethical practices. James is going to hate this, Claire observed as we drafted the announcement. You're not just succeeding, you're making his whole approach to business impossible. My phone lit up with messages from other firms wanting to join. The revolution wasn't just winning, it was becoming the new standard. You taught me about corporate alliances, I texted James. But you never understood they could be built on trust instead of mutual blackmail. The afternoon brought more validation. The SEC announced new transparency requirements that looked remarkably like our framework. The regulators are following our lead, Claire noted, reviewing the requirements. Everything you've built is becoming industry standard. Sarah Morrison returned with the first draft of our alliance charter, not just guidelines for operation, but a complete reinvention of how firms could work together. You know what James never grasped? I asked Claire as we reviewed the document. Real power isn't about controlling others. It's about empowering everyone to succeed ethically. Looking out at the city skyline, I thought about how James had taught me that business was a zero-sum game. I was proving that transparency created opportunities for everyone. Ready to change the whole industry? Claire asked, gathering the alliance documents. Ready to show them all what real success looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about power through secrets. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of openness. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies, it's in transforming their entire way of thinking. 3 months after taking control, we launched something that would make James's old methods not just unethical, but technically impossible. Our new blockchain-based transparency system would automatically track and verify every transaction across the alliance firms. It's more than just technology, I explained to the gathered CEOs. It's a way to make integrity the default, not just the goal. Claire brought in the initial test results. Companies using our system were seeing unprecedented levels of investor confidence and client trust. James's old network is panicking, she reported. They're calling it the end of flexible business practices. My phone buzzed with his predictable response. You're making it impossible to compete in certain markets. No, I replied. I'm making it impossible to cheat in any market. There's a difference. The system went beyond simple transaction tracking. It created a new kind of corporate culture where transparency wasn't just encouraged, it was automatic and irrevocable. Look at the adoption rate, Claire noted, showing me the latest figures. Firms are actually competing to prove they're more transparent than their rivals. Sarah Morrison, now a strong ally, had become one of our biggest advocates. James thought business was about controlling information, she told a technology conference. Elizabeth showed us it's about sharing truth. The afternoon brought news that even traditional finance strongholds were adopting our system. The old excuses about market necessities and competitive pressure were crumbling. You haven't just exposed corruption, Claire observed. You've made it technologically obsolete. My phone lit up with messages from global business leaders, all wanting to implement our innovation. The revolution wasn't just winning, it was becoming the only way to do business. Victoria, still trying to salvage her career at a smaller firm, sent a surprising message. James never saw this coming. He taught you how to fight in shadows, but you've eliminated shadows entirely. The system's success had sparked a wave of similar innovations across the industry. Other firms were developing their own additions to the transparency framework. They've realized it's adapt or die, Claire noted as we reviewed the implementations. The old way of doing business simply can't compete with clean operations. James's final attempt at resistance came through the industry association he'd once controlled. They tried to block our system's certification. A vote is scheduled for next week, Claire reported. They're claiming it's too restrictive, too controlling. I smiled, remembering how James had taught me about turning opponents' strengths against them. Perfect. Let's show everyone exactly who's arguing against transparency and why. The evidence we presented at the vote was devastating. Every firm opposing our system had hidden connections to James's old network of secret deals. The certification passed with 80% support, Claire announced afterward. Even your opponents voted for it once their own dealings were exposed. Looking out at the city lights, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that business success required shadows and secrets. You know what he never understood? I asked Claire as we watched another major firm adopt our system. True innovation isn't about finding new ways to hide. It's about creating systems that make hiding pointless. My phone lit up with a final message from James. You haven't just changed the rules, you've changed the entire game. No, I replied. I've created a better game. One where everyone wins by being honest. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in beating the old system, it's in building a new one that makes the old ways impossible. 4 months into my leadership, our forensic team made a discovery that shook the foundations of not just Harrison and Reed, but the entire industry. Hidden in James's encrypted files was evidence of a decades-long conspiracy that went far beyond our firm. You need to see this, Claire said, laying out the decoded documents. James wasn't just running his own schemes, he was part of a network that manipulated entire markets. I studied the files carefully, names, dates, transactions, all meticulously documented in James's precise handwriting. The scope was staggering. Look at these patterns, I pointed out, tracing connections between seemingly unrelated deals. Every major market shift, every surprising merger, every sudden bankruptcy, they engineered all of it. My phone buzzed with a message from James. Those files were private. You had no right to manipulate markets, I typed back. The SEC will be very interested in your private records. Michael joined us, bringing his forensic accounting expertise to bear on the evidence. This goes beyond white-collar crime, he noted grimly. They were effectively running a shadow financial system. The implications were enormous. James and his network hadn't just been breaking rules, they'd been writing them to create their own advantages. Every major downturn, Claire observed, reviewing the timeline. They didn't just profit from crashes, they caused them. I called an emergency, meeting with the alliance firms. They needed to understand what we'd uncovered and what it meant for the industry. Your husband wasn't just corrupt, Sarah Morrison said after reviewing the evidence. He was part of a system that made corruption seem necessary. Victoria appeared at my office unannounced, looking shaken. I didn't know, she insisted. James never told me the full scope, because you were just another tool, I finished. Like the offshore accounts and shell companies, all part of his machinery of deception. The afternoon brought more revelations as our team dug deeper into the files. The network's influence extended into regulatory bodies, media outlets, even academic institutions that shaped business theory. They didn't just break the system, Claire realized. They built it to be broken. Every standard practice was designed to hide their manipulation. I organized a joint press conference with the alliance firms. The world needed to understand not just what we'd discovered, but how we'd change it. For decades, I began, addressing the packed room. A small group of men convinced us their way was the only way business could work. Today, we prove them wrong. James made one last attempt to contain the damage, offering to explain the context of his records. His message arrived as we were presenting the evidence. Some markets require special handling. You're destroying necessary systems. No, I replied. We're exposing unnecessary corruption. There's a difference. The impact spread like wildfire. Regulatory investigations launched worldwide. Markets adjusted as investors recognized decades of manipulation. You haven't just caught them, Michael observed as we watched the fallout. You've exposed the philosophy that made their crimes possible. By evening, the first indictments were being prepared. Not just for specific crimes, but for the systematic corruption of business itself. Your husband's legacy is being rewritten, Claire noted as we reviewed media coverage. From business pioneer to architect of corruption. Because he never understood the most important lesson, I replied. Real business success doesn't come from controlling the system. It comes from making it work fairly for everyone. Looking out at the city lights, I thought about how James had spent years teaching me his methods, never imagining I'd use that knowledge to dismantle not just his schemes, but the entire corrupt system he'd helped build. Sometimes, I told Claire as we ended the historic day, the greatest revelation isn't what you uncover, it's what you choose to build in its place. The world of business would never be the same. James and his network had spent decades creating shadows. We were bringing everything into the light. 5 months after taking control of Harrison and Reed, we faced our biggest challenge yet. The old guard wasn't just fighting back. They were trying to turn the entire market against our transparency revolution. They're calling it the traditional business alliance, Claire reported, spreading news coverage across my desk. Every major firm that opposed our reforms is joining forces. I studied their announcement carefully. The language was pure James, claims about protecting market stability and preserving business flexibility that were really just code for maintaining corruption. Look at their board, I pointed out. Every member has connections to James's network. They're not protecting tradition. They're protecting themselves. My phone buzzed with a message from their spokesman. The market isn't ready for your level of transparency. Let's discuss a reasonable compromise. They still think this is a negotiation, I told Claire. Time to show them it's an evolution. Called an emergency meeting of our alliance firms. The conference room filled with faces that had once feared the old guard, now united in reform. They're trying to turn the market against us, Sarah Morrison observed. Claiming our transparency requirements will destabilize the system. Then let's show everyone exactly who's destabilizing what, I replied, remembering how James had taught me about turning attacks into opportunities. We launched a coordinated response that the traditional business alliance never saw coming. Not defense, but complete exposure. Release everything, I ordered. Every connection between their board members and James's network, every questionable transaction, every hidden deal, every manipulated market. Claire orchestrated the information. Release with surgical precision. First wave going public in 3, 2, 1. The impact was immediate. Financial news networks exploded with revelations about decades of market manipulation by the very people claiming to protect market stability. Their stock prices are in free fall, Michael reported, watching real-time market data. Investors are fleeing anything connected to the old system, Victoria called, her voice carrying a note of warning. James says you've gone too far. The whole system will collapse. No, I replied. Just the corrupt parts. That's what really terrifies them. The afternoon brought wave after wave of disclosures. Each revelation showed how the traditional business alliance had profited from the very instability they claimed to prevent. 3 board members have resigned, Claire announced. Their own companies are demanding internal investigations. I called a press conference to drive the final nail in their coffin. Standing at the podium, I thought about all the lessons James had taught me about corporate warfare. For years, I began, we were told certain business practices were necessary for market stability. Today's revelations prove those practices were actually causing the instability they claimed to prevent. The market response was devastating to the old guard. By day's end, the traditional business alliance had dissolved, its members scrambling to adopt our transparency standards. You've done more than beat them, Sarah Morrison observed as we watched their retreat. You've made their entire approach to business untenable. My phone lit up with James's final attempt at intervention. You've destroyed everything we built. The system can't function without corruption? I finished for him. Watch how much better it functions with integrity. Looking out, at the city skyline, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that business required shadows and secrets. You know what they never understood? I asked Claire as we reviewed the day's victory. Real stability doesn't come from controlling information. It comes from sharing it honestly. Sometimes the greatest challenge isn't in fighting your enemies. It's in proving their entire worldview wrong. 6 months into our revolution, the business world had changed so completely that it was hard to remember how things used to work. Our transparency system had become the new standard, and firms still clinging to old methods were rapidly becoming obsolete. The last major holdout is converting, Claire announced, bringing in the morning reports. Global Financial just announced they're adopting our framework. I reviewed their announcement carefully. Global Financial had been one of James's strongest allies, a bastion of old-style business practices. Their CEO called, Claire continued. He wants to meet. Says it's about more than just adopting the system. My phone buzzed with a message from James. Even Richard's betraying me now? He was my oldest friend. He's not betraying you, I typed back. He's choosing to survive. There's a difference. Richard Chen, Global Financial's CEO, had been James's mentor in the early days. Now he sat in my office looking both humbled and determined. You've done something remarkable, he began. Not just beaten the old system, but created something better. I studied him carefully. This isn't just about survival, is it? No, he admitted. It's about legacy. I spent 40 years teaching people like James how to manipulate markets. You've shown us all a better way. The afternoon brought more evidence of the transformation. Markets were functioning more efficiently than ever. Investor confidence was at record highs, and businesses were competing on merit rather than manipulation. Look at these performance metrics, Claire said, displaying the latest data. Transparent. Firms are consistently outperforming their secretive competitors. Victoria appeared unannounced, carrying a thick folder. These are James's last records, she said quietly. Everything he taught me about the old system. I think they belong with someone who knows how to use information properly. The folder contained James's complete playbook, every technique, every strategy, every method he'd used to maintain power through secrets. You know what's ironic? I asked Claire as we reviewed the documents. He taught me all of this thinking I'd help him maintain the system. Instead, I used it to transform everything. The transformation wasn't just in procedures or policies. It was in how people thought about business itself. Young executives don't even understand how the old system worked, Sarah Morrison observed during our alliance meeting. They can't imagine doing business through secrets and manipulation. My phone lit up with messages from business schools wanting to document our revolution. The next generation would learn about James's methods as cautionary tales, not success strategies. Your husband's legacy is being rewritten, Claire noted as we reviewed the curriculum changes. But not in the way he planned. Richard Chen returned, in the afternoon with more of the old guard, all ready to publicly embrace the new way of doing business. We were wrong, he admitted to the assembled press. Elizabeth hasn't just created a better system, she's shown us what business always should have been. Looking out at the city skyline, I thought about how James had spent years teaching me about power through control. You know what the real transformation is? I asked Claire as we watched the sunset. Not just changing how business works, but changing why it works that way. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in changing rules or systems. It's in transforming how people think about success itself. The day ended with a final message from James. You haven't just changed business. You've changed what power means. No, I replied. I've shown what it always should have meant. The business world would never be the same. And that was exactly what we'd been fighting for. 7 months into my leadership, we unveiled something that would make James's old methods not just outdated, but technically impossible. Our new AI-driven compliance system would automatically detect and prevent corrupt practices before they could even begin. The system doesn't just monitor transactions, I explained to the gathered CEOs during our launch presentation. It analyzes patterns, predicts attempts at manipulation, and ensures complete transparency across all operations. Claire brought the initial test results. Every firm using the pilot program has seen a 30% increase in investor confidence. The market rewards genuine transparency. Michael joined us with more validation. The algorithms aren't just catching potential fraud. They're making ethical business practices more profitable than corruption ever was. My phone buzzed with a predictable message from James. "You're making traditional business impossible." "No." I replied, "I'm making corrupt business impossible. There's a difference." Sarah Morrison, who had become one of our strongest allies, presented the system's impact on her firm. In 3 months, we've seen client trust skyrocket. When people know they can verify everything, they invest with confidence. The afternoon brought more evidence of our success. 3 major investment banks announced they would only work with companies using our system. The market had spoken. Transparency wasn't just ethical, it was essential. James's old network is panicking, Claire reported, showing me urgent messages from his former allies. They're realizing their entire way of doing business is becoming extinct. Victoria appeared in my office, looking both professional and slightly lost. "He never saw this coming," she said quietly. "James taught me every trick he knew about hiding information. You've made those tricks worthless." "Because he never understood the real power of information," I replied. "It's not about controlling it, it's about sharing it properly." The system's success sparked a wave of similar innovations across the industry. Other firms began developing their own additions to the transparency framework, each making the old ways of doing business more obsolete. "Look at these adoption rates," Claire noted, displaying global data. "Companies are actually competing to prove they're more transparent than their rivals." Richard Chen, James's old mentor, brought an unexpected perspective. "We spent decades teaching people like James how to manipulate markets through hidden information. You've shown us all that transparency is more powerful than any scheme." The afternoon brought more validation as our stock hit another record high. The market wasn't just accepting transparency, it was demanding it. 6 more firms implementing the system, Michael reported, including 3 that were James's strongest allies. I called a global press conference to announce the next phase. Our system wouldn't just be a corporate tool, it would become an open standard, available to any company ready to embrace true transparency. "Some will say we're giving away a competitive advantage," I told the board. "But making ethical business? The only possible way to operate is worth more than any proprietary system." James made one final attempt to fight back, gathering his remaining allies to launch a competing platform. Traditional business solutions, they called it, promising flexibility and discretion. "Let them try," I told Claire as we watched their announcement. "The market has already chosen transparency. True to my prediction, their platform failed within weeks. Investors refuse to work with companies choosing the old, opaque methods over verified transparency." "You've done more than beat them," Sarah observed during our alliance meeting. "You've made their entire approach to business obsolete." Looking out at the city lights, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that business success required shadows and secrets. "You know what he never understood?" I asked Claire as we ended another successful day. "True innovation isn't about finding new ways to hide. It's about creating systems that make hiding pointless." My phone lit up with a final message from James. "You haven't just changed the rules, you've changed what's possible." "No," I replied. "I've shown what was always possible when you choose transparency over deception. The business world would never be the same." Each day brought new firms adopting our system, new innovations building on our framework, new proof that ethical business was more profitable than corruption. "Ready for tomorrow?" Claire asked as we reviewed the next day's implementations. Ready. To keep showing them what real business success looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about power through secrets. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of absolute transparency. Sometimes the greatest innovation isn't in creating new tools, it's in using them to make the old ways impossible. 8 months into my transformation of Harrison and Reed, James's remaining allies launched their final desperate counterattack. The Traditional Business Alliance, a coalition of firms still clinging to the old ways, announced their own competing ethical standards. They're trying to create a parallel system, Claire reported, spreading their proposal across my desk. Something that looks like transparency but maintains their ability to hide information. I studied their document carefully. The language was pure James, phrases like practical business considerations and competitive necessities that were really just code for continued corruption. Look at their board members, I pointed out. Every single one has connections to James's old network. This isn't about business standards. It's about survival. My phone buzzed with a message from their spokesman. The market needs flexibility. Your absolute transparency is driving away certain clients. You mean it's driving away corrupt clients, I typed back. That's exactly the point. I called an emergency meeting of our alliance firms. The conference room filled quickly, CEOs and executives who had once feared James's network now united against it. They're claiming our standards are too rigid. Sarah Morrison noted that some business requires discretion. Then let's show everyone exactly what kind of discretion they mean, I replied, remembering how James had taught me about turning opponents' strengths into weaknesses. We launched a coordinated response that the Traditional Business Alliance never saw coming. Not defense, but complete exposure. Release everything, I ordered. Every connection between their member firms and known corruption. Every hidden deal. Every manipulated market, every secret account. Claire orchestrated the information deployment with surgical precision. First wave going public in 3, 2, 1. The impact was immediate. Financial news networks exploded with revelations about the very firms claiming to protect traditional business values. Their stock prices are dropping like stones, Michael reported, watching real-time market data. Investors are fleeing anything connected to their alliance, Victoria called, her voice carrying a warning. James says you've gone too far. The entire industry will collapse. No, I replied. Just the corrupt parts. That's what really terrifies them. The afternoon brought another wave of disclosures. Each revelation showed how the Traditional Business Alliance had profited from the very practices they claimed to be reforming. 4 board members have resigned, Claire announced. Their own shareholders are demanding internal investigations. I called a press conference to drive home our advantage. Standing at the podium, I thought about all the lessons James had taught me about corporate warfare. For years, I began, we were told certain business practices were necessary for market operation. Today's revelations prove those practices were actually destroying market integrity. The market response was devastating to the old guard. By day's end, the Traditional Business Alliance had collapsed, its members scrambling to adopt our genuine transparency standards. You've done more than beat them, Sarah observed as we watched their retreat. You've made their entire approach to business untenable. My phone lit up with James's final attempt at intervention. You've destroyed everything we built. The market can't function without corruption? I cut him off. Watch how much better it functions with integrity. Looking out at the city skyline, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that business required shadows and secrets. You know what they never understood? I asked Claire as we reviewed the day's victory. Real power doesn't come from what you can hide. It comes from having nothing to hide. The sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows that seemed symbolic of the old business world's final moments. In its place, something clearer and brighter was emerging. Ready for whatever comes next? Claire asked, gathering the day's reports. Ready to keep showing them what real business looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about power through control. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of absolute transparency. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies. It's in making their entire way of thinking obsolete. 9 months into my leadership of Harrison and Reed, our forensic team made a discovery that would shake the foundations of the entire financial world. Hidden in James's most secure servers was evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond individual corruption. "You need to see this immediately," Claire announced, bursting into my office with Michael close behind. The encryption team finally cracked James's oldest files. This goes deeper than anything we imagined. I studied the decoded documents spread across my desk. Decades of carefully documented manipulation, involving not just James but an entire network of power brokers who had effectively controlled global markets. "Look at these patterns," Michael pointed out, highlighting connections between seemingly unrelated events. Every major market crash, every surprising merger, every sudden bankruptcy, they engineered all of it. My phone buzzed with James's message. "Those files were never meant to be found. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually," I typed back, "I understand exactly what I'm dealing with. You taught me too well about keeping records." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. James and his associates hadn't just been breaking rules, they'd been writing them, creating a system designed to be manipulated. They had people everywhere, Claire noted, mapping the connections. Regulatory agencies, media outlets, even academic institutions shaping business theory. I called an emergency meeting with our alliance partners. They needed to understand not just what we'd discovered, but what it meant for the future of business. "Your husband wasn't just corrupt," Sarah Morrison observed after reviewing the evidence. "He was part of a system that made corruption seem necessary and normal." Victoria appeared unannounced, looking pale. "I knew about some of this," she admitted, "but I never understood the full scope. James only showed me pieces." "Because you were just another piece," I replied. "Like the offshore accounts and shell companies, all part of their machinery of deception." The afternoon brought more revelations as our team dug deeper into the files. The network's influence extended into every corner of the financial world, shaping everything from interest rates to commodity prices. They didn't just manipulate the system, Michael realized. They built it to be manipulated. Every standard practice was designed to hide their control. I organized a joint press conference with global regulatory agencies. The world needed to understand not just what we'd uncovered, but how we would change it. For decades, I began, addressing the packed room. A small group of men convinced us their way was the only way business could function. Today, we prove them wrong. James made one final attempt to contain the damage, offering to explain the context of his records. His message arrived as we were presenting the evidence. "Some markets require special oversight. You're destroying necessary controls." "No," I replied. "We're exposing unnecessary manipulation. There's a difference." The impact spread like wildfire. Through global markets, investigations launched worldwide as regulators recognized the patterns we'd exposed. Major firms rushed to distance themselves from the old network. "You haven't just caught them," Claire observed as we watched the fallout. "You've exposed the philosophy that made their crimes possible." By evening, the first indictments were being prepared. Not just for specific crimes, but for the systematic corruption of global finance itself. "Your husband's legacy is being rewritten," Sarah noted as we reviewed media coverage. "From business innovator to architect of corruption." "Because he never understood the most important lesson," I replied. "Real business success doesn't come from controlling the system. It comes from making it work fairly for everyone. Looking out at the city lights, I thought about how James had spent years teaching me his methods, never imagining I'd use that knowledge to dismantle not just his schemes, but the entire corrupt system he'd helped build. Sometimes, I told Claire, as we ended the historic day, the greatest discovery isn't what you uncover, it's what you choose to build in its place. My phone lit up with a final message from James. You've done more than expose us. You've made our entire world obsolete. No, I replied. I've shown everyone what the business world should have been all along. The financial industry would never be the same. James and his network had spent decades creating shadows. We were bringing everything into the light. 10 months after taking control, an unexpected opportunity arose that would transform not just Harrison and Reed, but the entire industry. The heads of major financial institutions worldwide wanted to join our transparency revolution. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are requesting a meeting, Claire reported, bringing in their joint proposal. Their boards have voted unanimously to adopt our ethical framework. I studied their request carefully. These were institutions that had once been James's strongest allies in maintaining the old system of hidden deals and market manipulation. Look at their proposal, I noted, highlighting key sections. They're not just asking to join our alliance, they want to help expand it globally. My phone buzzed with a message from James. You've turned my oldest friends against me. Decades of relationships destroyed. No, I typed back. They're choosing survival over corruption. There's a difference. The meeting was set for that afternoon in our main conference room. CEOs and board chairs from 20 major financial institutions filled the space, their collective worth representing trillions in market value. What you've built here, Morgan Stanley's CEO began, isn't just a new way of doing business. It's the only way business will be able to function in the future. Sarah Morrison, now one of our strongest allies, presented the data from our existing alliance firms. Complete transparency doesn't just prevent corruption, she explained. It creates unprecedented market efficiency. Look at these performance metrics, Claire added, displaying comparative charts. Every firm that's adopted our standards has outperformed their secretive competitors by at least 40%. The afternoon brought more validation as real-time market data showed investors flooding into transparent firms and fleeing from those still clinging to old methods. 6 more major banks requesting to join, Michael reported, updating our expansion plans. The entire financial system is shifting toward our model. Victoria appeared at my office door, looking both professional and slightly uncertain. James asked me to warn you, she said. He claims this level of transparency will destabilize global markets. No, I replied firmly. It will just destabilize the corruption he built into them. I called a global press conference to announce the expanded alliance. Standing at the podium, I thought about how James had always claimed certain business practices were necessary evils. For decades, I began, we were told that market efficiency required secrecy, that certain deals had to happen in shadows. Today, we prove definitively that transparency creates stronger, more efficient markets. The market response was immediate and overwhelming. Our stocks soared as investors recognized the implications of major institutions adopting our standards. The old guard is finished, Claire observed as we watched the numbers climb. Even their most loyal defenders are abandoning their methods. James made one final attempt to fight back, gathering his few remaining allies to launch a competing alliance. They called it the Traditional Banking Partnership. Let them try, I told Claire as we watched their announcement. The market has already chosen transparency over tradition. True to prediction, their partnership collapsed within weeks. No major investors would work with firms choosing secrecy over verified transparency. You've done more than beat them, Sarah noted during our alliance meeting. You've made their entire approach to finance obsolete. Looking out at the city skyline, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that business required shadows and secrets. You know what he never understood? I asked Claire as we reviewed the alliance's growth. Real power isn't about controlling information. It's about sharing it in ways that benefit everyone. My phone lit up with a final message from James. You haven't just changed the rules. You've changed what's possible in finance. No, I replied. I've shown what was always possible when you choose integrity over deception. The global financial system would never be the same. Each day brought new institutions joining our alliance, new innovations building on our framework, new proof that transparent markets were more profitable than corrupt ones. Ready for tomorrow? Claire asked as we prepared for another day of expansion. Ready to keep showing them what real financial power looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about control through secrecy. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of absolute transparency. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in defeating the old system, it's in creating a new one that makes the old ways impossible. 11 months into my leadership, we unveiled something that would permanently transform global finance. Our new AI-powered blockchain system would make every transaction, every deal, and every market movement transparently visible and immutably recorded. The system doesn't just track transactions, I explained to the gathered financial leaders. It predicts and prevents attempts at manipulation before they can happen. No more hidden deals. No more market manipulation. Claire brought, in the initial test results from our pilot program, every institution using the system has seen a 50% increase in investor confidence. The market rewards verifiable transparency. Michael joined us with the technical validation. The algorithms aren't just catching potential fraud, they're making ethical trading more profitable than manipulation ever was. My phone buzzed with James's predictable response. You're making traditional finance impossible. No, I typed back. I'm making corrupt finance impossible. The market prefers it that way. Sarah Morrison, now leading our Alliance's technology initiative, presented the system's impact across multiple institutions. In just 3 months, we've seen unprecedented levels of market efficiency. When every transaction is verifiable, trust becomes automatic. The afternoon brought more validation as major global exchanges announced they would only list companies using our system. The message was clear. Transparency wasn't just an option, it was becoming mandatory. James's old network is incomplete. Panic, Claire reported, showing me urgent messages from his former allies. Their entire method of operating is becoming technically impossible. Victoria appeared in my office, looking both impressed and slightly alarmed. He never imagined this, she said quietly. James taught me every trick for hiding information. Your system makes those tricks obsolete. Because he never understood the real value of information, I replied. It's not about controlling it. It's about making it universally accessible and verifiable. The system's success sparked a wave of similar innovations across the industry. Other institutions began developing additions to our platform, each making the old ways of operating more impossible. Look at these adoption rates, Claire noted, displaying global data. Financial institutions are actually competing to prove they're more transparent than their rivals. Richard Chen, James's former mentor, brought an unexpected endorsement. We spent decades teaching people like James how to manipulate markets through information control. You've proven that complete transparency is more powerful than any manipulation. The afternoon brought another milestone as our stock hit an all-time high. The market wasn't just accepting our innovation, it was demanding its universal adoption. 10. More major institutions implementing the system, Michael reported, including 3 that were James's strongest allies in Asia. I called a global conference to announce the next phase. Our system wouldn't just be a proprietary platform, it would become an open standard, available to any financial institution ready to embrace complete transparency. Some will say we're giving away our competitive advantage, I told the board, but making ethical finance the only possible way to operate is worth more than any proprietary system. James made one last attempt to fight back, gathering his remaining allies to launch a competing platform. Traditional financial solutions, they called it, promising flexibility and discretion. Let them try, I told Claire as we watched their announcement. The market has already chosen verified transparency over hidden flexibility. True to prediction, their platform failed within days. No major investors would work with institutions choosing hidden methods over verified transparency. You've done more than beat them, Sarah observed during our alliance meeting. You've made their entire approach to finance technologically obsolete. Looking out at the city lights, I thought about how James had tried to teach me that financial success required shadows and secrets. You know what he never understood? I asked Claire as we ended another transformative day. True innovation isn't about finding new ways to hide. It's about creating systems that make hiding impossible. My phone lit up with a final message from James. You haven't just changed the rules, you've changed what's possible in global finance. No, I replied. I've shown what was always possible when you choose transparency over deception. The financial world would never be the same. Each day brought new institutions adopting our system, new innovations building on our framework, new proof that ethical finance was more profitable than corruption. Ready for tomorrow? Claire asked as we reviewed the next day's implementations. Ready to keep showing them what real financial innovation looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about power through secrets. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of absolute transparency. Sometimes, the greatest innovation isn't in creating new tools, it's in using them to make the old ways impossible. 1 year after taking control of Harrison and Reed, the full impact of our transformation was finally being recognized. Harvard Business School announced they were making our story a mandatory case study titled The Ethics Revolution: How One Woman Changed Global Finance. They want you to give the keynote at their annual finance conference, Claire reported, bringing in the invitation. Every major business school will be streaming it live. I reviewed their curriculum outline carefully. They weren't just teaching our transparency methods, they were completely rewriting how business ethics was understood. Look at this, I pointed out to Claire. They're using James's old methods as examples of outdated, failed approaches. Everything he built is becoming a cautionary tale. My phone buzzed with a message from him. They're teaching students that everything I achieved was wrong. No, I typed back. They're teaching them everything you missed about real success. The Harvard conference filled their largest auditorium. Business leaders, academics, and students gathered to hear about the transformation we'd sparked. 1 year ago, I began my address. My husband announced his engagement to his secretary at our family dinner. He thought he was demonstrating his power. Instead, he revealed its greatest weakness. The audience sat captivated as I detailed our journey. Not just the corporate takeover, but the complete reimagining of how business could operate. James taught me everything he knew about power, I continued. But he never understood its true nature. Real power doesn't come from control or secrets. It comes from creating systems that empower everyone, Victoria attended, sitting quietly in the back. During the break, she approached my podium. I've been teaching at Columbia's business school, she said, helping students understand how to recognize and resist the old corrupt systems. Because you saw both sides, I replied. You learned James's methods, then watched them fail against real transparency. The afternoon sessions focused on our technological innovations. Business schools worldwide were implementing our ethical framework as their new standard. Look at these enrollment numbers, Claire noted, showing me the statistics. Applications to ethical business programs have doubled. Students want to learn the new way, not the old. James made one final attempt to defend his legacy, publishing an article about practical business realities. The response was immediate and devastating. Every major publication has rejected his arguments, Claire reported. Even his old allies are publicly disagreeing with him. I called a press conference to address the academic world's adoption of our methods. Standing at the podium, I thought about how completely things had changed. For decades, I began, business schools taught that certain ethical compromises were necessary for success. Today, we prove definitively that integrity is the most powerful market force. The impact spread beyond business schools. Law schools, economics departments, even political science programs were restructuring their curricula around our transparency principles. You've changed more than business practice, the Harvard dean observed during dinner. You've changed how we understand power itself. Looking out at the Boston skyline from the conference center, I thought about how James had tried to teach me his version of success. You know what he never understood? I asked Claire as we watched the sunset. Real education isn't about teaching techniques, it's about revealing truths. My phone lit up with a final message from James. You haven't just taken over my company. You've erased my entire philosophy. No, I replied. I've shown everyone why it failed. The academic world would never be the same. Each semester would bring new students learning about transparency and ethics not as constraints, but as the most powerful tools for success. Ready for tomorrow's session? Claire asked as we prepared for day 2 of the conference. Ready to keep. Teaching them what real business leadership looks like, I replied, thinking of how James had tried to mentor others in his methods. Instead, he'd inspired me to show the world a better way. Sometimes the greatest recognition isn't in proving your enemy's wrong. It's in teaching future generations why they were never right. 13 months after taking control, our transformation had spread far beyond American borders. International financial centers were adopting our transparency systems, and the global market was fundamentally changing. The Tokyo Stock Exchange is implementing our framework, Claire reported, spreading the morning's financial papers across my desk. Singapore and Hong Kong are following suit. Even the traditionally secretive Swiss banks are converting. I reviewed the global adoption rates carefully. Markets that had once been havens for hidden transactions were now competing to prove their transparency. James's international network is collapsing, Michael added, showing me his latest analysis. Every offshore center he used to hide transactions is either adapting or becoming obsolete. My phone buzzed with a message from James. You're destroying decades of international financial relationships. No, I typed back. I'm creating better ones based on trust instead of secrets. The United Nations had requested a special session on financial transparency. Standing before representatives from every major nation, I thought about how far we'd come. For generations, I began, we were told that certain markets required secrecy, that some financial centers needed to operate in shadows. Today, we prove that transparency works better everywhere. Sarah Morrison, who had been implementing our system across Asian markets, presented the results. Every market that adopts complete transparency sees immediate benefits. Investment increases, efficiency improves, corruption disappears. Victoria, now working with international compliance teams, brought unexpected support. Even the most resistant financial centers are realizing they can't compete while maintaining secrets. The afternoon brought more validation as the European Union announced new regulations based on our framework. The old world of hidden accounts and secret transactions was ending. Look at these adoption rates, Claire noted, displaying global data. Financial centers are actually competing to prove they're more transparent than their rivals. James made one final attempt to preserve his international network, gathering allies from traditionally secretive markets to resist the change. Let them try, I told Claire as we watched their announcement. The global market has already chosen transparency. True to prediction, their resistance crumbled within weeks. No major investors would work with financial centers choosing secrecy over verified transparency. You've changed more than individual markets. Sarah observed during our Global Alliance meeting. "You've transformed how international finance works." Richard. Chen brought news from his Asian connections. "The old network is finished. Even their most loyal defenders are adopting your standards." Looking out at the Manhattan skyline, I thought about how James had built his power through international secrets and hidden connections. "You know what he never understood?" I asked Claire as we reviewed the global transformation. "Real international power isn't about maintaining shadows across borders. It's about creating transparency that connects everyone." My phone lit up with another message from James. "You haven't just changed American finance. You've made my entire global system obsolete." "No," I replied. "I've shown the world what international finance should have been all along, the world." Bank and International Monetary Fund announced they would only work with financial institutions using our transparency systems. The global transformation was becoming irreversible. "We're receiving implementation requests from 50 more countries," Michael reported. "Even nations traditionally opposed to financial oversight want to join." I called a global press conference to address the worldwide adoption. Standing at the podium, I thought about how James had claimed certain international practices were necessary evils. "The world was told that global finance required secrecy," I began, "that international markets couldn't function with complete transparency. Today's transformation proves that transparency isn't just possible. It's essential for true market efficiency." Claire brought more statistics showing how transparent markets were outperforming their secretive counterparts everywhere in the world. "Every financial center that adopts our standards sees immediate benefits," she noted. "The market rewards verified transparency over traditional secrecy." The sun set over Manhattan as we reviewed the day's global progress. Each time zone passing into darkness brought new markets into the light of transparency. "Ready for tomorrow's international meetings?" Claire asked as we prepared to end another transformative day. "Ready to keep showing the world what real global finance looks like," I replied, thinking of how James had tried to teach me about international power through secrets. Instead, he'd inspired me to demonstrate the power of worldwide transparency. Sometimes, the greatest impact isn't in changing one market, it's in transforming how the entire world does business. The backlash came from unexpected quarters. While most financial centers had embraced our transparency framework, a coalition of emerging economies began to push back. Led by a consortium of ministers from Brazil, India, and Nigeria, they claimed, "Our system was a form of economic imperialism." "This is nothing more than financial colonialism," declared Minister Rafael Santos during a heated UN subcommittee meeting. "We're being forced to adopt a system designed by American interests." Knew the resistance was more complex than simple nationalism. Victoria had been preparing for this moment, compiling detailed case studies showing how transparency benefited developing economies more than anyone else. "It's not about American interests," Victoria responded during a closed-door strategy session. "It's about eliminating the systemic corruption that has kept these economies trapped in cycles of poverty." Richard Chen provided critical intelligence from his network. "They're scared," he explained. "Many government officials have built personal fortunes through opaque financial channels. Our system threatens their individual power structures more than any external force." Michael's data team worked overtime, creating comprehensive reports that broke down the economic benefits for each resistant nation. Increased foreign investment, reduced capital flight, and improved international credit ratings told a compelling story. Sarah Morrison took a different approach. Working through her extensive contacts in Asian financial circles, she began demonstrating how transparent markets had transformed economies like Vietnam and Indonesia. These weren't theoretical arguments. These were proven economic success stories. James continued his behind-the-scenes maneuvering, attempting to exploit the nationalist rhetoric. I could see his strategy: create enough doubt to slow our momentum, to give his old network time to regroup. He doesn't understand. I told Claire during a late-night strategy meeting. This isn't about winning an argument. It's about proving a fundamental truth about how financial systems should work. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A whistleblower in Brazil released documents showing how multiple government ministers had been siphoning millions through hidden, offshore accounts. The revelation created a political earthquake, instantly undermining the nationalist resistance. They've been doing exactly what they accused us of, Claire said, reviewing the leaked documents. Protecting a system of personal enrichment under the guise of economic sovereignty. Within weeks, the resistance crumbled. The very nations that had most vocally opposed our transparency framework began requesting implementation support. What had started as nationalist pushback transformed into a global movement. Transparency doesn't just expose corruption, I explained during a TED Talk that went viral globally. It creates a new ecosystem of trust, an ecosystem where every participant, regardless of their country or economic status, can compete fairly. The World Bank began offering implementation grants to developing economies, turning our framework into a tool of economic empowerment rather than control. What James had seen as a threat, we were proving to be the most powerful economic democratization tool in generations. We're not just changing financial systems, Victoria observed. We're redistributing economic opportunity on a global scale. As the sun set over our Manhattan headquarters, I reflected on the journey. What had begun as a personal mission to challenge James's corrupt network had become a global movement redefining how international finance operates. The resistance had only made our vision stronger, more refined, and ultimately more transformative. James's downfall was more personal than I had anticipated. As our transparency framework dismantled his global network, I discovered the human cost behind his years of manipulation. A private investigator we'd hired uncovered a trail of broken relationships and destroyed lives, people James had used and discarded throughout his career. Each file told a story of calculated betrayal, promising young professionals whose careers were mysteriously derailed, entrepreneurs whose innovative projects were systematically blocked, entire communities' economic potential crushed by hidden financial maneuvers. He wasn't just running a network, Claire discovered during our deep dive into his history. He was creating a global system of economic control. The most devastating revelation came from an unexpected source. James's own daughter, Elena, contacted us. She had been working as a junior analyst in a London financial firm, completely unaware of the full extent of her father's operations. I always knew something was wrong, she told me during a confidential meeting, but I never understood the scale of his manipulation. Elena brought with her a collection of encrypted drives and personal correspondence that provided unprecedented insight into James's methodologies. These weren't just business documents. They were a roadmap of systematic economic manipulation spanning decades. Michael and his data analysis team worked around the clock, decrypting and organizing the information. What emerged was a picture, far more complex than we had initially imagined. James hadn't just been running a network, he had been constructing a parallel economic system that operated entirely in global shadows. He created economic choke points, Victoria explained, reviewing the documents. Specific financial corridors where he could control information, manipulate transactions, and extract value without anyone noticing. The personal toll became clear. Many of the professionals James had destroyed were brilliant minds who could have transformed their industries. Instead, they had been systematically marginalized, their potential economic contributions erased. Richard Chen discovered a pattern. James had specifically targeted innovators who threatened the existing financial power structures. Entrepreneurs. With technologies that could democratize financial access, researchers developing new economic models, professionals who challenged the status quo, all had been quietly neutralized. This goes beyond personal ambition, Sarah Morrison observed. This was a deliberate strategy to maintain an outdated economic hierarchy. Elena's decision to provide us with the evidence was more than a professional choice. It was a moral reckoning. She understood that her father's legacy was built on destruction, not creation. "I want to help rebuild," she told me, her voice a mixture of pain and determination. "Not just expose what he did, but show that there's another way to approach global finance." We integrated Elena into our team, her insider knowledge proving invaluable. She became a critical bridge between understanding the old system and constructing the new transparent framework. James attempted one final legal maneuver, threatening Elena with complete financial disinheritance. But the landscape had changed. The very legal and financial systems he had manipulated for years now worked against him. "You've lost more than just a network," I told him during our final confrontation. "You've lost the ability to operate in a world that values transparency." The human cost of his decades of manipulation was becoming clear, not just in financial terms, but in potential. The countless careers derailed, the innovations suppressed, the economic opportunities stolen. As we prepared to present our findings to international regulatory bodies, I realized our mission had become something greater than exposing one man's corrupt network. We were demonstrating a fundamental truth about economic potential. When transparency replaces secrecy, human potential can truly flourish. Our transparency framework had become more than a financial system. It was a global movement reshaping how societies interact with economic power. Universities began developing entire curricula around our principles. What had started as a disruptive financial strategy was now being taught as a fundamental approach to economic ethics. Business schools from Stanford to Shanghai were incorporating our transparency models into their core curriculum. "This isn't just about finance," Victoria explained. During a guest lecture at MIT, "This is about reimagining how human organizations can operate with genuine trust as their foundational principle." The technological infrastructure we'd developed became a blueprint for other sectors. Healthcare started adopting similar transparency models, creating systems where patient data could be securely shared while maintaining individual privacy. Government procurement processes began implementing our verification techniques, dramatically reducing corruption. Sarah Morrison was leading an initiative to adapt our framework for nonprofit and humanitarian organizations. "Imagine a world where every donated dollar can be traced," she told me, "where charitable contributions are completely transparent, eliminating the possibility of misappropriation." Richard Chen discovered an unexpected side effect. Countries that had fully implemented our transparency systems were seeing dramatic increases in social mobility. The hidden economic barriers that had previously locked people into generational economic constraints were being dismantled. "Transparency is the ultimate democratization tool," Michael observed, analyzing the global data. "When everyone can see the same information, individual merit becomes the primary driver of economic opportunity." Elena, having fully integrated into our team, began developing educational programs targeting young professionals in emerging economies. Her personal mission had become showing how transparency could be a tool of empowerment rather than control. We weren't just changing financial systems. We were providing a new operating system for human collaboration. The technological challenges were significant. Our team of engineers and data scientists worked constantly to stay ahead of potential manipulation techniques. Every time someone attempted to create a workaround, we were there to close the loophole. "The moment you try to hide something," I often said, "is the moment you reveal your weakness." International regulatory bodies began adopting our verification protocols. What had once seemed radical was now becoming the global standard. The World Economic Forum declared our transparency framework as the new benchmark for responsible economic development. Claire managed our global implementation team, coordinating efforts across continents. Each new country that adopted our system became a case study in economic transformation. James watched from the sidelines, his once powerful network reduced to a footnote in the emerging global economic narrative. The systems of secrecy and manipulation he had spent decades constructing were now obsolete. Transparency isn't just a strategy, I told a group of international investors. It's the inevitable evolution of human economic cooperation. As our team prepared for the next phase of global implementation, I reflected on the journey. We had started with a personal mission to challenge a corrupt network. We had ended up rewriting the fundamental rules of how global economic systems could operate. The future wasn't about maintaining power through secrets. The future was about creating value through genuine, verifiable trust. And that transformation was only beginning. The global success of our transparency framework came with unexpected personal challenges. The constant pressure, the relentless work of transforming international finance had taken its toll on our entire team. I noticed it first in Claire's eyes. The late nights, the constant international meetings, the weight of global expectations were wearing us down. What had begun as a mission was becoming a mission that consumed us entirely. We can't lose ourselves in this transformation, I warned, during a private conversation with her. The moment we become as rigid and uncompromising as the systems we're replacing, we've already lost. My words resonated deeply. I realized our approach couldn't just be about changing external systems. We needed to transform ourselves as, well, the transparency we demanded of global finance had to start with personal transparency. Victoria suggested we bring in external coaches, professionals who could help us maintain our psychological and emotional balance. I worked with Michael to develop a comprehensive wellness program for our entire team, recognizing that sustainable change required sustainable human beings. Elena's perspective proved particularly valuable. Having witnessed her father's destructive approach to power, she understood the importance of maintaining human connection amid massive systemic change. Power isn't about control, she often said during our strategy meetings. It's about creating space for others to grow. I asked Sarah Morrison to document our journey, not just as a historical record, but as a blueprint for organizational transformation. Her insights revealed that our greatest strength wasn't our technology or our strategy. It was our ability to adapt, to remain human in the face of massive change. Richard Chen brought a philosophical perspective during a team retreat in the Ray Mountains outside San Francisco. I listened carefully as he shared insights from his research into organizational psychology. True transformation, he explained to us, happens not through systems, but through people. Our transparency framework is just a tool. The real magic is in how we choose to use it. James made one final attempt to undermine our work. He leaked a series of internal communications, hoping to create doubt about our methods. But the transparency we had built was so robust that the attempt backfired spectacularly. Look at how he operates, I told the team during an all-hands meeting. He's still trying to work through shadows and secrets. We respond with complete openness. Within hours, we had not only addressed every allegation, but turned the attempted sabotage into another demonstration of our commitment to transparency. Our response became a case study in organizational resilience. The personal cost was significant. Relationships strained, personal lives became secondary to the mission. But we were creating something larger than ourselves, a new way of thinking about economic collaboration. Claire brought me a report one evening that captured the true essence of our journey. It wasn't about the financial numbers or the global implementation. It was about the human stories. The entrepreneurs who could now access capital, the communities freed from economic oppression, the individuals who could now see and understand the systems that had previously controlled them. We're not just changing finance, she said softly. We're changing how humans relate to power. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across our office, I understood that our greatest challenge wasn't transforming global financial systems. It was maintaining our humanity while doing so. The mission continued. But now, I understood that transparency was more than a technical solution. It was a deeply human approach to collaboration, to trust, to reimagining what's possible when we choose openness over secrecy. The final chapter of our transformation arrived unexpectedly. A global economic summit in Geneva would become the ultimate test of everything we had built. Representatives from every major financial center, international regulatory body, and economic powerhouse gathered. I saw James, now a marginalized figure, watching from the periphery, a ghost of the power he once wielded. This isn't just about changing financial regulations, I began my keynote address. This is about reimagining human potential. The room was silent. Years of work, decades of systemic manipulation, generations of hidden economic control, all converging in this moment. Victoria helped me present the comprehensive data. Every metric told the same story. Transparent systems outperformed secret ones by exponential margins. Investment increased. Corruption decreased. Economic mobility expanded. The evidence was irrefutable. Michael's team had prepared a visualization that told the human story behind the numbers. Each data point represented a life transformed, an entrepreneur who could now access capital, a community freed from economic oppression, an individual who could now see and understand the systems that had previously controlled them. Elena stood beside me, representing something more than just our team. She embodied the possibility of transformation, the child of a system built on secrets, now championing a world of radical transparency. We're not just changing how money moves, she told the assembled global leaders. We're changing how human potential is recognized and unleashed. I listened as Richard Chen provided the geopolitical context. The transparency framework had become more than a financial system. It was a new approach to global cooperation. Countries that had once viewed each other with suspicion were now collaborating with unprecedented openness. Sarah Morrison presented implementation strategies for developing economies. I knew what we had created wasn't a top-down solution, but a collaborative framework that could be adapted to local contexts while maintaining core principles of transparency. James made one final desperate attempt to challenge our approach. His argument was the last gasp of a dying system, a plea for the complexity of secret networks, the supposed necessity of hidden channels. Complexity isn't protection, I responded firmly. It's just another word for manipulation. The vote was unanimous. The global financial system would fully adopt our transparency framework, not as a regulation, but as a fundamental reimagining of economic collaboration. Claire squeezed my hand. We both understood this was more than a professional victory. This was a moment that would reshape how humans interact with economic power. The summit concluded, I reflected on the journey. We hadn't just changed a system. We had created a new possibility for human collaboration. A world where trust wasn't naive, but strategic. Where transparency wasn't a risk, but the most powerful form of economic innovation. I watched James from a distance. His network dissolved, his influence reduced to a historical footnote. The systems of secrets and manipulation he had spent decades constructing had become obsolete. Some people build power by controlling information, I had often said. We build power by setting information free. The sun set on Geneva, casting long shadows across a room full of global leaders. But for the first time, those shadows were completely transparent. Years later, I found myself reflecting on the transformation we had initiated. I understood that our greatest achievement wasn't technological, it was human. We had created more than a transparency framework. We had demonstrated a fundamental truth about human potential. When we remove the barriers of secrecy, when we create systems based on trust rather than control, we unleash something profound. The world had changed. Not through revolution, but through a systematic, relentless commitment to openness. Financial systems that once seemed immovable had been reimagined. Economic opportunities that were once hidden became accessible. Claire, now leading our global implementation team, often reminded me of our early days. We didn't just change how money moves, she would say. We changed how people see possibility. I watched Elena become a global leader in economic ethics, continuing the work of transformation. Where her father had seen economic power as a tool of control, she saw it as a mechanism of human potential. James had faded into irrelevance, a relic of an outdated approach to global finance. The networks of secrets he had carefully constructed had become obsolete, replaced by systems of verified trust. Victoria continued developing educational programs, ensuring that the next generation understood transparency not as a technical solution, but as a fundamental approach to human collaboration. I supported Michael's data teams as they continued pushing the boundaries of what transparency could mean, not just in finance, but in healthcare, education, governance. The principles we had developed were becoming a new operating system for human interaction. Sarah Morrison worked tirelessly with emerging economies, showing how transparency could be a tool of economic empowerment. Countries that had once been locked out of global financial systems were now active, equal participants. Richard Chen's research continued exploring the philosophical implications of our work. His questions fascinated me. How does radical transparency change human behavior? How does the possibility of being seen completely alter our approach to collaboration? I had learned that true power isn't about controlling information. It's about creating systems where information flows freely, where trust is the primary currency. We hadn't just changed how global finance operates. We had demonstrated a new possibility for human cooperation. As I looked out over Manhattan, the city that had been our starting point, I thought about the journey. What had begun as a personal mission to challenge a corrupt network had become a global movement redefining human potential. Transparency wasn't just a strategy. It was an invitation to trust, to collaborate, to reimagine what's possible when we choose openness over secrecy. The transformation continues. Always. Always.